Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to my next election prediction video. Today we're going to be going over my 7th U.S. Senate prediction for 2022, for the 2022 midterms. We are officially about less than 101 days away. I know tomorrow is technically the official 100-day mark until the midterms, but figured might as well make it, the video right now. And it's the 2 week mark. A lot has happened in the last 2 weeks with some of these predictions. You will see some states go up, some states go down. Um, yeah, and let's just get into it right away. Want to say, first of all, happy end of July and early August. I will come back soon with my next governor election prediction. And yeah, let's just get right into it. We're going to start by filling in the safer slash solid Democratic and Republican states. These are the states that are going to go um, to the Democrats and Republicans by over 15%. Some of these I will point out in particular for the Republican side. Utah, Evan McMullin, and former or an independent who is running against Mike Lee, the incumbent Republican senator. He's a bit of an um, anti-Trump Republican, and he's been doing quite well in polling. But at the same time, I don't want to make it likely because I think that Evan McMullin has some pretty conservative views. He is a former Republican, I believe. Whoa, sorry about that. Don't know what just happened with my screen there. Um, Hold on, let's wait for it to load. But I believe he's a former Republican. He ran for president in 2016, and he did pretty well in the state of Utah, his home state. So let's look at his party affiliation. Yeah, Republican before 2016. He's running with the backing of the Democratic Party, so that's why you don't see a Democratic nominee. So I think he will take away some votes from Mike Lee. But if McMullin does end up winning, which isn't too likely at this point, but if he does, I think that he would caucus with the GOP in the Senate. And he'd be the first independent Republican senator, independent who caucuses with the Republicans. In Missouri, I'm keeping that as safe R because it looks like Eric Schmidt has pretty much overtaken the rest of the pack. Um, Vicky Hartzler, I think, was originally, in my opinion, the favorite after Greiden started losing. Considering this poll by Trafalgar, because this is a Republican primary, so they're different Republican factions, but it showed her tied with Erica Greitens. I think, Eric Schmidt is clearly the front runner. He's won these last 7 polls, and the primary is actually this Tuesday. And Eric Greitens has lost a lot of ground with that commercial that he or that ad that he made about rhino hunting, hunting Republicans in name only. Not an actual rhino, but it was very, inappropriate, in my opinion. I don't want to get too political here. I mean, this is channel about politics, but I try to, keep my biases out of my videos. But, that has now no doubt done some harm to him. And also, his previous allegations of sexual misconduct, I think, have scared the GOP into not nominating him because he may, I had this racist, likely Republican, at the time or a couple of predictions ago because I thought that Greitens was going to be that nominee. Democrats will not win in Missouri, especially now that it looks like Eric Schmidt is going to be the one to replace Roy Blunt in the U.S. Senate. So now let's get into the likely states. For Democrats, there's only one, Colorado. Michael Bennet is running for his third term, and he's going up against Joe O'Dea, who is this or Joe O'D, um, who is running as this kind of moderate Republican. He faced Ron Hanks in the Republican primary, won against Ron Hanks. Democrats are trying to boost Hanks' campaign because he was a more extreme candidate. It's something that you've been seeing a lot more in this cycle is Democrats trying to funnel money into more extreme GOP candidates because they think they have a better shot at winning. In this situation, it failed for them. Joe O'Dea, I would say, is probably the best nominee Republicans could have put up against Michael Bennet. But still, you have to remember Bennet is a strong incumbent. Even in 2010, when Democrats lost, what is it, 6 or 7 seats if you count that Massachusetts special election, Bennet held on by a point. So, there is something to be said about Michael Bennett's electability in 2016. He outperformed Hillary Clinton. And I think, after Biden has won the state by 13 points, I don't think Bennett's going to win by that many, especially not against Joe O'Dea. But I think that he'll win by 5, 7 points, somewhere around. It will be similar to his previous margin. There is still, I want to say really quickly that there is still a Republican lean, even, in the generic ballot and also just in the midterms as well due to Biden's unpopularity. His approval has gone slightly up, but a lot of people are putting that aside, and because the GOP has just alienated so many voters with their extremist candidates, and also I think that Donald Trump is definitely a factor. He has been pretty active in the midterms, especially in endorsing in these races, but still. He has had some losses in the Senate, not as many as, say, the governor's races, but, I won't get into it because we have to keep on with the video. But, Trump is definitely influencing some voters not to back the GOP, even in a year that was so favorable to them and it was so easy to get Senate control. And I'm not going to spoil the end of my prediction. If you've been seeing my more recent predictions, you can probably you can probably guess what the how the map is going to turn out. But yeah, let's talk about the likely Republican states. In Florida, I'm going to go over this one really quickly. Marco Rubio is an extremely popular GOP senator in his state. The state has been moving to the right. It voted for Donald Trump by 3.5 points in 2020 after voting for him by only 1% in 2016. This was one of the few states in 2020 that swung to the right relative to 2016. Marco Rubio won in 2016 by 8 points. He outpaced Donald Trump by about seven. So that definitely speaks to him. And in a redder year, I have no, I do not have a lot of confidence in Val Demings defeating Rubio, especially when you see these own Democratic pollsters. Even though there's a lot of undecideds, the best that they could do the best Demings could do is bring Rubio down to a 5 point margin. There has been this one poll that had 30 undecided voters, an insane amount, so I think that this is really just, it's, the only polls that are showing Val Demings within striking distance of Marco Rubio are the ones that are, sponsored by Democratic groups or, her own campaign, or they just have a lot of undecided voters. And so, I think that Florida is pretty much out of the question for the Democratic Party. It will be somewhat competitive, but I still think, Ron DeSantis will help Marco Rubio, and Marco Rubio will help Ron DeSantis, which we will go over in my governor's election prediction in a couple of days or tomorrow. I don't know exactly. We expect it in the next couple of days. In Iowa, Chuck Grassley. I don't want to brag, but I called it on this race. I called it on this race being somewhat competitive. The most accurate pollster in 2020, Seltzer and Co., only puts Chuck Grassley above Michael Franken by 8%. Yes, there are 12 undecided or other voters in this poll, but even in a known Republican poll, the best that Grassley could only win by 9 points. Abby Finkenauer, of course, lost the primary to Michael Franken, and I think he was the better choice for Democrats. And I think that Grassley, being almost 89 years old, is going to give. There are going to be some repercussions for that. I think that it's a long shot to say that Iowa will go blue because of the national environment we are in. And Kim Reynolds will definitely win her reelection as governor, but Grassley, I think, is in probably his most competitive election in decades. He's been winning by these insanely large amounts. He outpaced Donald Trump in the state by 15 points in 2016, won by 31 in 2010. You just look back, solid red until his first election in 1980, and that was against an incumbent in which he won by 8 points. I think that Grassley will probably win by like 10 or 11 points, but it's not going to be a safe margin unless, you use 10% and above for your safe margins, but I use 15 plus points for safe margins. Sorry about that. So yeah, I think Iowa's going to be likely as of right now. We could be wrong. In previous elections, I'm pretty sure that in previous elections, like in 2016, Grassley had seen in earlier polls that his race was going to be more competitive, but it ended up not being. But this time, I think will be the time that Grassley wins by under 15%. And that's saying a lot as to someone as powerful in the state as Chuck Grassley. In Ohio, this race, so I'm moving this up into likely Republican. I cannot believe how bad these polls are. I I think really, when you look at all these undecided voters, I think Tim Ryan, first of all, is a good candidate. Last time I had this as lean Republican. I am contemplating, it was a hard decision for me to put it back into likely Republican. I'm kind of tempted now to put it back in that characterization. But seeing how wrong the polls were in 2020 in Ohio, Joe Biden was in striking distance of Donald Trump, in these polls. Trump was up by, one or barely under one. He was doing Joe Biden was doing really well in these polls, and he lost the state by 8%. He barely made a dent in Trump's margin from 2016. Now, Rob Portman, is the retiring Republican senator. He's not running for re-election. If he was, this race would be safe, written off. Even with Tim Ryan, he might, do a little bit better than Ted Strickland did in 2016, but still. J.D. Vance, I think, was not the best nominee the Republicans could have put up, but Josh Mandel was also not a very good one either. And I think seeing how bad, the Ohio's polls have been traditionally very bad, and I could see Tim Ryan winning in this race, but as of right now, I'm really, really hesitant. If I'm wrong on election night, and if we see more, polls that are not sponsored by Democrats or are not, really bad rated, or that are not really, mediocre pollsters, maybe, and if we start to see this undecided number come down, but I could see that. This one poll by Ryan's campaign, I think, is the most accurate. Shows a 2-point lead for Tim Ryan, which I think is reasonable, but I don't think it's going to happen. And there's a margin. It's within the margin of error. And you also have to remember, Democrats have a senator in the state, Sherrod Brown. There are states where the voters want, split Senate delegations, and you've seen this throughout, recent American history. Sherrod Brown won in 2018 by 7%, after they reelected Portman by 21, or after Portman won reelection by 21. And in Montana, there's a similar story in 2020 where, 2018 John Tester won his reelection, and then Steve Daines did. Steve Bullock was a good candidate, but still, you have to remember that if Tim Ryan wins, Ohio will have two Democratic senators for the first time in 30 years, I believe, almost 30 years. Um, and I think that a lot of people are going to be thinking about that. And I think that, JD Vance, still has a good enough appeal in the state. Tim Ryan does too. I think he'll outperform Joe Biden for sure at this point. But I think he'll lose by about 5 to 6 or maybe 7% to JD Vance. So that's all the likely states. We're going to get into the lean states now. And for Democrats, I have quite a few. I'm going to start off with the state of New Hampshire. I'm moving this down to lean. I think I was a little overconfident in Democrats. They still haven't updated this average from April. We have seen a new poll come out since then. I know this says July 8th, which was before my last prediction, but sometimes they take a while to get out polls. In this own Democratic poll, Maggie Hassan only leads over Don Boldo, or Bolduc, by 4 points. There's still no update on the Republican primary polling. We do not really know who's going to be the nominee. I'm assuming it's Don Bolduc. It could be Chuck Morse, which I think would be a better nominee for Republicans, but still, they missed the mark with Chris Sununu. He would have had a near certainty of winning this race, not by like 30 or 40 points like he did in 2020 for his governor race, but because Hassan's still popular in New Hampshire, is not nearly as conservative on the federal level as it is on the state level. But, Sununu probably would have taken Hassan down. And the fact that he passed on the race, which surprised me and a lot of other people, that that's going to make it hard for Republicans, in this race because, Maggie Hassan won 2016. She defeated Kelly Ayotte, who won in 2010 by 23 points. New Hampshire was very close in the presidency as well. And so imagining how strong Hassan was, as an incumbent when she was able to defeat a super strong Republican incumbent in 2016, I think that that speaks a lot to how she might do now, even in a, arguably redder environment. I think Republicans will still take the House this November, but the Senate, I think, is still up in the air. So I'd say right now Maggie Hassan wins by a lean margin in the Democratic column. In the state of Arizona, this is another state that's holding its primaries this Tuesday. Mark Kelly seems to be doing okay. We've seen a little bit more polling data come out of the state. Yeah, it's been kind of skewed towards the Democrats, and no, I don't think that Mark Kelly is going to defeat Blake Masters by 15 points. I think that that's a little silly. Um, but I do think that, even if you add up even if Kelly loses all the undecideds in this poll, he still wins by one over Masters. Not saying that's going to happen. Masters has Trump's endorsement. He's a pretty far right political candidate. I think that Mark Brnovich or Jim Lamont would be a much better candidate. I think, Brnovich is pretty much out of the question now. He's polling, less than 20%. Lamont might come and take it away from Blake Masters, but I just seriously doubt that. And I think Carrie Lake being so favored to win the GOP nomination for governor, even though that's tightening, I think that'll help Blake Masters. But I just Mark Kelly is a fundraising beast, and he has room to fall, contrary to what some people would tell you. Um, he won by 2.3% in 2020. He was expected to win by a lot more, but still, Biden only won the state by 0.3%, I believe. Yeah. And so that shows that Kelly has some room to fall. This state could easily flip to the GOP, but I think the Masters is going to have a hard time convincing more moderate Republicans who voted for Biden, Kirsten Sinema, Mark Kelly, and possibly even Hillary Clinton, to vote for him based on his extreme policies. You know, this could, I have a feeling that this might, become another meme about John McCain's revenge against Trump. Um, but I think that Arizona's just it really depends on who's the GOP nominee right now. It looks like it's going to be Blake Masters, but if it's not, I might move it down to tilt Democrat. I might even move it into a Republican characterization, but you never know. In Pennsylvania, John Fetterman is doing extremely well against Dr. Oz, or, Mehmet Oz, whatever you want to call him. The GOP seems to be kind of abandoning this race. There's been some news recently, that the Republican, in the governor's on the governor's level, Doug Mastriano's kind of being abandoned by the Republican Governors Association because they kind of see Josh Shapiro, the Democratic nominee, as kind of unbeatable, which I don't think he is. But Mehmet Oz has just done terrible in this polling. Look at all these polls, even a Fox News poll. I want to get this out to the more conservative people on my channel. A Fox News poll showed Fetterman leading by 9 points, or no, actually 11 points. Do I think that's going to happen? No, of course not. That's too lopsided. This is a flip for Democrats, but I'm sorry, but Oz was a terrible candidate to run in the state. They should have chosen David McCormick. If Trump had not endorsed Dr. Oz, this race would be so much easier for the GOP to win. This was such an easy race. And yeah, there is some I've, watched unbiased election predictions or videos that have, been saying, Fetterman won't get good turnout in, the suburbs of Philadelphia, or, in the suburbs in Philadelphia, because of how bad he did in the primary with black voters in Philadelphia. And I'm like, well, okay, that's a fair assumption, but you also have to remember, yes, there could be less turnout, but Fetterman also can appeal, will definitely appeal to African American voters. Oz is not even campaigning really in the state. He keeps reminding people of his New Jersey mansion, which just seems kind of stupid to me. I question whether starting to question whether or not Oz even wants to be in the U.S. Senate. With how badly he's campaigning, even while Fetterman is still out with recovering from a stroke, he's getting better, but still, he's not on the campaign trail. And he's still trouncing Dr. Oz. And I think it just shows that Oz was such a terrible candidate. Kathy Barnett would have been as well. She's more extreme than Doug Mastriano. I think Mastriano is at this point a better candidate than both Oz and Barnett, even though he's running for the governorship. But that's because Mastriano is a little bit less, outspoken about his beliefs. Oz is not particularly extreme, but that's also a problem for him since that's going to that's he was kind of labeled by the GOP establishment as a rhino. Mitch McConnell endorsed David McCormick against him. He's been accused of being pro-choice. Because he's made previous statements being called when he's called himself a moderate Republican before he started to enter into politics. So I think he's kind of a two-faced candidate, and that's going to be a serious problem for him. But we'll just have to see in Pennsylvania. Oz can win. I want to remind people of that, but I just don't think that it's that likely as of right now. The final lean state that I have is the state of Georgia for the Democrats. There are some lean Republican states. Herschel Walker, it just keeps getting worse and worse for him in the polling. He can still win. I want to make sure that, people understand that I think these candidates can still win. Um, but Warnock is doing so well in polling, even in these Fox News and Republican sponsored polls, he's defeating Walker. Yeah, Walker won this one poll that was conducted by John Bolton's Super PAC, but there was a lot of undecided voters here too, just, even more than in this Fox News poll. So I want to, be clear that I think that Warnock may lose to Walker. I think that this race is probably going to run into a run or head into a runoff, which would take place in December of this year. But I think that Warnock just has he has, despite the national environment, he has, Georgia on his side. He will probably get enough black turnout and he will get enough, I think that Herschel Walker's going to depress Republican turnout some, but, it will definitely go up from where it was in 2021 in the runoff because, it's a better environment for the GOP. Yeah, but that's all I got to say about Georgia. I think that I'm moving this race into lean Democratic because one of the polls, the polls in Georgia aren't too far off. Biden was expected to win by 2; he won by 0.23. But even if you look, Warnock still wins by about 1 or 2%, and if you take off the 2% from these margins, and I think that that's pretty much an accurate assumption of what's going to happen in Georgia, in my opinion, of course. Now into the lean Republican states, we got Wisconsin and North Carolina and Wisconsin. The Democratic primary field has been pretty much cleared for Mandela Barnes. Every single major challenger has pretty much dropped out of the race and endorsed Barnes, which is pretty much, he's not the only, he's Mandela Barnes is not the only candidate left, but he is the only major candidate. These other people, I don't really know who they are. I think that Barnes is an okay candidate, but Ron Johnson is a pretty strong candidate, and he has shown us that he can outperform polling and approval ratings before. And I've seen a little bit more determination from Wisconsin that they want Ron Johnson out after his embarrassments, regarding the January 6th committee findings about him, handing over those envelopes of fake electors, or those envelopes of slates of fake electors to then Vice President Mike Pence. So I think that will hurt him. But Barnes is also not as good of a candidate as Russ Feingold, and I think that he is not really doing a lot to appeal to moderate voters. So I think in Wisconsin being so receptive to the national environment, which is still a Republican plus, it's not as much as it nearly was, beforehand. But I think that Wisconsin will still go lean Republican. In North Carolina, I think, I was contemplating putting this race as, likely for the GOP, but Sherry Beasley's been doing okay in polling. The polls in North Carolina were pretty bad in 2020. They expected a Biden win and a Cal Cunningham win in the Senate election. Both of them lost. Even though Cunningham was outperforming Biden, he actually ended up underperforming him slightly, and he lost. Even though Cunningham pretty much won every single poll leading up into the general election campaign. These Republican pollsters are showing a close race. This own Republican sponsored poll by John Bolton's Super PAC does show Beasley leading by 3 points. There's 17 other undecided voters here, though. And so I think that, I think that it'll be, on average, Bud leads by about, 2 points. I think that that's fair to say. I'd say more a 3 or 4 point margin is, that's probably more likely, but we'll just have to see what happens in North Carolina. I'm not very trusting of the polls after what happened in 2020, and I think Ted Budd's a stronger candidate than Tom Tillis was, even though he was an incumbent. Even but Tillis was also stronger than we all thought. He's won election to the Senate twice. Even though not being favored in either of them. And I think Sherry Beasley is a good candidate. She can definitely appeal in an open race to some moderate voters. In North Carolina, as some of these candidates, like in Pennsylvania with John Fetterman, they're not really mentioning the Democratic title as much by their name. Obviously, if someone asks, they're going to say they're a Democrat, but they're also trying to appeal to independent voters and, say we're for North Carolina or we're for Pennsylvania. And I think that that's a good strategy to win over some of those voters. I think it'll work for John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, and it might work for Sherry Beasley in North Carolina, but that is to be decided. Also in Pennsylvania, it is too. Don't get me wrong, but I think North Carolina is going to be much harder. And finally, in the state of Nevada, after all this rambling, Catherine Cortez Masto has been leading in some of these newer polls with less undecided voters, but they are Democratic sponsored. I, I'm really conflicted on this race. I could see it going to Masto, considering or Cortez Masto, because that's her last name. It's because her I'm not going to get into it, but that's her last name. Nevada does underestimate Democrats in polling, but I think after they overestimate yeah, Nevada usually underestimates Democrats in polling, uh, but Cortez Masto was overestimated in 2016. I think in the last poll she was expected to win by five, or in the last couple she was expected to win by 5 or 4. She ended up winning by 2.4%. She ran even with Hillary Clinton, so she doesn't have as much room to fall. I will say that unbiased election predictions, has made me a little bit more confident in Cortez Masto after, pointing out that there was especially low turnout in the Las Vegas area, and Biden still won the state in 2020 by a large amount. Or about the same amount, not a very large amount, it's pretty narrow, but relatively, from what was, from for turnout, he won it by about the same amount. But I think I'm going to give it narrowly to Adam Laxalt. And the reason why is because I think that even though Cortez Masto is doing is a very good Democrat, she probably would outpace most Democrats with Hispanic women. But I think that Adam Laxalt, even though Nevada is a pretty pro-choice state, and Laxalt's comments on abortion are, pretty concerning for him as a candidate, for his chances at defeating Cortez Masto. This race is really the probably will be the closest race of 2022 at this point. That could change. But I think that Laxalt has a very slight advantage due to the fact that the Democratic Party is losing Hispanic voters in this election. Much more, they're losing a lot more Hispanic voters than they were in 2020, and especially in 2018 and 2016. So there is a rightward trend among Hispanics, which were crucial. They're very crucial to Democratic victories in Nevada, especially in the Las Vegas area. Besides that, the rest of the state is pretty Republican. But I think it really depends. But I think right now I'd give it to Adam Laxalt as a narrow favorite because of his name recognition, the fact that he's won a statewide office before in Nevada, I believe, because I think the Attorney General is an elected position. He did underperform polls in 2018 and lost to Steve Sisolak in the governor's race, but it was also a blue wave year. This is, a slight red wave year, but I think that Adam Laxalt can narrowly, at this point, very narrowly, come out on top, and that's all I'm going to say. So, at the end of the day, Democrats end up with 50 seats, Republicans end up with 50 seats. Vice President Kamala Harris breaks the tie. Democrats flip. They lose. Republicans flip Nevada, but they lose Pennsylvania, which brings us right back to where we started. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video. I'll see you in a couple of days with my next governor election prediction. Hope you enjoy, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications. Check out my main channel, Interactor127. And, if you want to see some non-political content, um, if you just want to hang out and see some more of my videos, have a good time, whatever it is, you can hop on over there as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time when we talk about the governor's election prediction and all things politics. See ya.